Hi, my name is Tommy Alderman, otherwise known as Patty's Little Helper at AldermanFarms. I spent almost 20 years in law enforcement, during which time I was trained as a critical incident stress debriefer, as a member of a team who was dispatched when public safety professionals were involved in high stress events to help them process what they'd been through and to teach them what to expect out of their minds, bodies, spirits, emotions, in order to help them come out stronger and to survive the aftermath of a traumatic event. Little did I know that there would come a day in my life, long past law enforcement, when I would need those principles to help me and my family survive the aftermath of a trauma. On December the 9th, 2016, I was attacked by my 140-pound Anatolian Shepherd, who was intent on destroying me. My 19-year-old son had to save my life by shooting that dog while he was in the midst of attacking me on the ground. Needless to say, it was the most traumatic thing we had been through. And the principles that I had learned years before about how critical incident stress, or the stress resulting from a high stress event, can affect people, I knew what to expect. And because I knew what to expect, I knew there was nothing wrong with me when some of those reported symptoms found their way into my life and into the life of my family. Recently, I was asked to present on the subject at the first annual Homesteaders of America conference in Warrenton, Virginia. And we videotaped that presentation in the hopes that you, the viewing public, would find it helpful. Because let's face it, trauma is not limited to public safety professionals or the military. I'm living proof that trauma can happen to anyone at any time in any walk of life. If you haven't been involved in a traumatic incident, chances are you will be, or you will know someone who will or has. So my prayer is that the information presented in this presentation will be helpful to you or someone you love, either now or in the future. I want you to understand the presentation was made in a barn, so the lighting for the video is not the best. The audio at the very beginning is not that great because I forgot to turn my audio recording on, but you'll notice just after a minute or so that that situation changes. It's a long presentation. It's about an hour. If you need to break it up, watch it in bits and pieces, please do that. Feel free to share this video widely with anyone who is either currently suffering the effects of a trauma or anyone who may be subject to a trauma, which basically means anybody in the world. So please share it freely, watch it, learn it, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Tommy at traumastrikes.org. We'll get to the presentation coming up next. My name is Tommy Alderman. My lovely wife Patty is over here driving the iPhone. You see we've got a YouTube channel with about 700 videos and about 13,000 subscribers, and we use a GoPro and iPhones, and sometimes we use our iPhone to record audio when we remember to turn it on. Now it's on. But I don't know if all of you are familiar with us. If you are, it's probably from our YouTube channel, AldermanFarms, which we've had going since March of 2012, I think, was when we started it. I actually had a life before that, and today we're talking about a homestead-related topic that it didn't dawn on me was a homestead-related topic until something awful happened. And that is, we're talking about when trauma strikes, surviving the aftermath of a critical incident. And I've been graciously given some material from the state of Mississippi's, it's not really the state, it's a quasi-agency, the Mississippi Law Enforcement Alliance for Peer Support, and they allow me to adapt this for civilian use, because for years and years there's been information available to assist public safety folks who are involved in a critical incident, some type of traumatic event, officer-involved shooting, this and that. But I've never really seen any training or information available for regular folks. And the truth of the matter is, trauma can strike anywhere, to anybody, whatever walk of life you're in. We'll see some examples of some critical incidents that can happen to you. And we'll talk a little bit about one that happened to me. I have a little bit of qualification to talk about this subject because in a previous life I was officer alderman and then sergeant alderman and for a while captain alderman. Most of my career spent at the Baker Police Department in Baker, Louisiana. And yeah, I didn't like shaving my head like that, but I wanted to be like my brothers there, and we made an Oreo cookie with our heads together like that. And when I was in Louisiana, I was a charter member of the Louisiana Critical Incident Stress Debriefing Team. So I was trained, and I was one of the team members that got sent throughout the state as a peer to sit down with officers who had been involved in a traumatic event and to try to help them process what they'd been through and prepare them for what to expect out of their minds. It was this training that was key. And December the 9th, it's kind of hard to see these pictures. That's a 140-pound Anatolian Shepherd named Duke who loved me, and I loved him. And I know that's a weird thing to say when you come to find out that he tried to kill me on December the 9th, 2016. When we first brought him home, I look at this and I sort of laugh and sort of shiver. But I made this little meme, a picture of him as a puppy, and put that up and said, "Beware of dog eventually." I didn't know I was talking to myself. But the attack is not the purpose of my discussion today, the details of the attack. I'm happy to talk about them. I've written about them. You can read about the sequences of events on my blog at AldermanFarms.net. It's the last thing we've written, and before that we hadn't written anything in months or years. But suffice it to say this, I readily admit mistakes that we made from day one. Underestimating, not understanding the purpose of, not doing the right kind of research or enough of it, not understanding dog behavior, not understanding body language. So many things I misunderstood and underestimated or discounted that resulted in a very, very bad misunderstanding of who this dog was. 99% of the time, he was a giant, lovable fluff ball that sat in my lap, that would crawl up in my lap for me to love on him. I've got lots and lots of really good memories with this dog and one very, very bad one. And so, if any of you are squeamish, the following slide contains 4 shots of my facial injuries following this dog attack. It's following treatment. So I have been stitched up, which I didn't have surgery. They did all this in 6.5 hours of stitching in an emergency room, 4.5 hours of that, 2 men constantly stitching. I received multiple hundreds. That's all they could ever tell me. I kept saying, "Y'all got to tell me how many." There's bragging rights on the line with my oldest son. He said, "We don't know." Because they didn't do individual just looping. In some places it was 5 layers deep, where they would go in, do a layer of stitching, come out a little, stitch more, come out a little, stitch more. He broke my nose, he broke my jaw, and severely bruised my ego. And so, if you're squeamish and don't want to look away, and I'll tell you when it's safe to look back. But if we're all ready, and if you probably can't tell too good from these pictures anyway, I was pretty well messed up. The right side of my nose, the whole right half of my nose was down here. Nearly off. It was hanging by a thread. And those guys it was just a miracle and it really was. It was the grace and mercy of Christ above anything else that allowed me to survive that day. Included in that grace and mercy is the fact that of my tactical training in law enforcement. It kept me alive long enough for my 19-year-old son to come save me with my Glock. It was the grace and mercy of Christ that I had been trained in critical incident stress debriefing and knew what to expect in the aftermath of such a traumatic event. So I'm very, very thankful to him. I don't have time to go into it. We'd be here all night, but there were 100 things that had to line up and happen that day exactly like they did happen in order for me to live. And they did. Including some things I've never in my life done before and never in my life done since. But for some inexplicable reason, which was the providence of God. I did them that day in the right order, and I was able to survive. I write about that, some of that in that blog post, and I'm still writing about it, and there'll be more to come about that. All right, just as a reward for you having to look at that, here's a pig. That's supposed to be wagging. That's supposed to be a movie. So I don't know what happened, but that's okay. That's a little picture of a pot-bellied pig wagging its tail. And this is where I say, I like pig butts and I cannot lie. So anyway, pigs have the cutest little butts, especially when their tails are wagging. What you're looking at there is me sticking my finger through a hole in my blue jeans where my 19-year-old son shot a .40 caliber round through my pants leg and didn't hit me. And we didn't realize it because he didn't hit me, and he hit the dog all 3 times, and one of those times went through my pants leg, and we didn't figure that out until later. I'll spare you the details of how we figured it out. And I'll come back to something very important about that later. Couldn't be more impressed with my 19-year-old son. Let me encourage you that have children, teach your children young. It will come back. When I told my son to shoot, when he came out there, and the dog is on top of me, my son's about 15 feet away. Why I didn't wait till he got 2 feet away, I don't know. I guess God knew that it was time. And I said, shoot him now. And in my mind, there was no delay between the word now and hearing that first shot ring out. But there was long enough time, nanoseconds even, for my 19-year-old son to process the following. I'm about to shoot my own father in the leg, but that will not kill him. This dog will. And he's shot. Later, he said he remembered me teaching our kids 2 things. And this is the encouragement to you parents. My son's 20 now, he was 19 at the time. I had taught my kids when I was still in law enforcement, when they were little, that, hey, if we're ever in McDonald's and you hear Dad say, get under the table, don't ask why. Why? Just do it. Get under the table, because Dad is noticing something, that danger is approaching, and you need to. So I taught my kids, obey in a crisis situation, obey me without hesitation, without question. He remembered that, just like that. And so he obeyed with no hesitation. He also remembered something that wasn't so much of a lesson, but something he heard me say over and over again when we were watching a news story about an officer-involved shooting where maybe the suspect, maybe the officers had fired their shots, had fired more than one round, or multiple rounds before the suspect was deceased, or the threat was neutralized. And the inevitable questions, and this is not, please don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. Well, let me clarify. Let me disclaim it this way. I'm not saying every officer-involved shooting is justified. Obviously, that's not true. There are officer-involved shootings that are not justified. What I'm talking about, though, is in a perfectly justifiable shooting where multiple rounds are fired, the inevitable questions are, why did you have to shoot him 3 times? Why did you have to shoot him 4 times? And I always remind my children, when a threat is advancing on you, you shoot until the threat is neutralized. You shoot until the threat stops. He remembered that. It was amazing. In a nanosecond of time, he remembered those 2 things. And he said to himself, I'm about to shoot my dad in the leg, but that won't kill him. And so he shot me through the britches leg, and I'll come back to that. We found the bullet, by the way. We found all 3 of them. They all 3 hit the dog, all 3 went through the dog, and we found all 3 of them. That one you can't tell from the picture, but there's that little bitty piece of something hanging off the bottom is a piece of denim fiber that was embedded in the bullet. So, let's get into the meat of what we're talking about here today. And the meat of what we're talking about is critical incident stress. But to set that up, I want to briefly talk about the difference between cumulative stress and critical incident stress, because one has an impact on the other. Cumulative stress is stress that builds up or accumulates over time, hence the term cumulative. It accumulates. The stress of everyday life, all right? The stuff that you deal with every day, work-related stress, relationship issues, frustrating situations, major life changes. This is important. Even good stuff can cause you stress. Even a move to a better job, a more paying job, can be stressful. There's stress involved, and that's all part of cumulative stress. It's made worse by lack of exercise, poor eating habits, poor sleep habits. Tips for handling cumulative stress: regular exercise, regular honest communication with your spouse, parents, peers, whatever the case may be. If you're married, spouse is number one. Healthy eating, plenty of water, stay hydrated. It matters. It helps you deal with stress, and a healthy amount of sleep and rest. So what is a critical incident? Nowadays, the jargon is changing because they say that critical incident stress has become too jargonized. And so sometimes you'll hear them referred to as a high stress event. So what is a high stress event? A critical incident or a high stress event can be defined as any event that has a stressful impact sufficient enough to overwhelm the usually effective coping skills of an individual or group. A normal stressful situation, that person or group can handle that just fine. But it's any event that is stressful enough to overwhelm that. Critical incidents are abrupt, powerful events that fall outside the range of ordinary human experiences. These events can have a strong emotional impact even on the most experienced among us. This is very important. Failure to effectively deal with cumulative stress will worsen the effects of critical incident stress. So a person who is under a lot of normal, everyday, cumulative stress and then finds himself or herself running headlong into a critical incident is going to have a harder time processing that mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically than a person who gets regular exercise or for whatever reason has a low cumulative stress level in their lives. Does that make sense? It's kind of common sense, really. Now, I'll put some pictures of the brain in here that I'm not going to talk about, but I put them in here just to let you know that this is not mumbo jumbo. When a critical incident happens to a person, there is stuff happening in your brain. There are chemical transactions that are taking place in your brain that do not happen normally, under normal stress circumstances. Stuff happens in your brain. There are reasons for this. Again, this is not mumbo jumbo. This is stuff that happens in your brain that causes certain things to happen and not happen. For example, there's a thing called high stress event amnesia or critical incident amnesia. During a high stress event, the brain changes the way that it records events. Read that again. During a high stress event, your brain changes the way that it records things. All right? This is beyond your control. It's beyond the person who's involved in that incident's control. They can't help it. They can't tell the brain not to do this. They're unaware of it. It just happens because of what's going on physiologically in your body. Seemingly important facts are totally left out because the brain perceives them to be unimportant to survival. All that matters to the brain is staying alive. And you can read story after story where police officers involved in traumatic, or firemen involved in traumatic events, they don't remember huge portions of what's going on. Chances are, not in every case, but chances are they're not lying. They don't remember. Their brain skipped it. And you think, why would they skip that? That's important. But it's because their brain changes the way it records things due to the increase in certain chemicals, blah, blah, blah. It happens. Here's another thing that happens. Confabulation. This happened with me in over time with my recounting of the dog attack. A disturbance of memory defined as a production of a fabricated, distorted, or misinterpreted memories about oneself or the world without the conscious intention to deceive. Accounts given immediately following a critical incident might very well differ from accounts given after some time has passed. There were parts of my story that I got wrong, and I told it over and over again. And for example, my son, the hero of the story, the 19-year-old, I painted him as an even bigger hero, saying that, and I don't know how many times I told this before he corrected me, that he took it upon himself to get my phone and call 911. And one day he heard me telling it to somebody, and he said, "No, Dad, you dial 911 and handed me the phone, or you handed me the phone and told me to dial 911. See, even now I'm having trouble, and I can't help it because my brain was not functioning normally at that time. So that picture's not clear to me. But I would have bet you a cold hard nickel that my son got my phone, because that's the way see what I'm saying? It's an actual memory in my brain that he did that. But he didn't. It happened because of confabulation. Totally out of my control. And there are other examples, and it happens all the time. Oops. Accounts given immediately, did I say that already? Accounts given immediately following a critical incident might very well differ from accounts given after some time has passed. Let me make a current events point right now. Isn't it maddening how much the story coming out of Las Vegas changes over time? Can I tell you something? Raise your hand if you're not surprised. I'm not surprised. Raise your hand if you're not surprised because you understand that. Yeah. It's going to, those things. Now, is Tommy Alderman standing up here telling you that whole thing is no, I'm not trying to tell you that there's not something fishy there. I'm not telling you that. All I'm saying is it could be completely due to this. Can you imagine a more stressful event than that? Holy cow. Oh my. So there was I promise you, even if it turns out that there's some hocus pocus involved with that, there's also a 5-gallon bucket of this happening. Because they can't control their brains. And this is happening. And that's at least part of the explanation why timelines have changed, accounts have changed. Because initial account, I never believe an initial account that I see about anything that has any kind of trauma involved with it. I say, fog of war kind of thing. That's another, you've heard the term fog of war. That's what that is. It's not clear. Your brain plays tricks on you and does interesting things. So, what are some examples of critical incidents, also referred to as high stress events? It could be anything, okay? Serious accidents, machinery, automobile, other, animal attacks. Hello! I vote for that one. That's a critical incident. Criminal assaults, burglary, rape, sudden death of a loved one, especially if they die in your presence. Natural disasters. Look at that bold text down there. Anything else. And in the Greek that means anything else. Anything else that meets our definition of a critical incident, which is this. It can be defined as any event that has a stressful impact sufficient enough to overwhelm the usually effective coping skills of an individual or group. They're abrupt, powerful events that fall outside the range of normal, ordinary human experiences, and they can have a strong emotional impact even on the most experienced among us. And it can be anything, any kind of trauma. So I don't want you to focus in on that list and say, well, as long as none of this happens to me, I'm good. It could be anything, all right? That list was not all inclusive. We all okay with that? Nod your head this way. This means yes. All right, good. Here's another important thing to recognize. People react differently to traumatic events, even to, sure enough, no questions asked, critical incidents. Anybody would say that's a critical incident. People react differently. Look at this. About, give or take, these are rough numbers. This is based on research and interviews. About 1/3 experience little or no trauma at all. My 19-year-old son falls into that category regarding the dog attack. He had no problem. None. I probably aggravated him because I kept asking him, you okay? You sure you okay? You sleeping all right? Blah, blah, blah. It didn't faze him. This is important. That's no guarantee that the next critical event he runs up on, he'll have the same reaction. There's no guarantee of that. So approximately 1/3 experience little or no trauma. Approximately 1/3 experience moderate trauma. Approximately 1/3 experience severe trauma. And look at that bold text. Any of the three is normal. If you fall within any of those three categories, you're normal. You're normal. And the reason that people react differently is because of their personal coping styles, prior exposure to high-stress events, degree of intensity of the loss, additional learned behavior or information after the event, and their overall balance of life, which is another way to say cumulative stress. If a person has high cumulative stress, they may fall in the lower third there. If they have a carefree life, that may help them be more in the upper third. So, how do we mitigate critical incident stress? Well, that bold text represents what we are doing right now, here today. Training, pre-crisis preparation and education. Diffusing is what takes place within hours of a critical incident. Somebody to talk to remind you, basically. It's really not much more complicated than to remind you of what took place in the first one. To remind you what to expect. To remind you of things that we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. Then, debriefing within days if necessary. Followed by one-on-one crisis intervention if necessary. Family crisis intervention if necessary. Follow-up and referral if necessary. Who can tell me what the last 1, 2, 3, 4 have in common as you see it on that screen? If necessary. If necessary. You notice that the training, of course, is necessary. But if you notice that the diffusing does not say if necessary. The reason that's written like that is because most often, I don't want to say that. Let me say it this way. Many times, all that's needed is training and a diffusing to short circuit a bad outcome that requires further intervention. A lot of times, in a lot of cases, if a person has been trained, prepared to know what to expect, and then has somebody just informally, I meant to say that, a diffusing is an informal kind of conversation. Debriefing is a little bit more of a formal setting, structured conversation. But most often, in public safety or otherwise, a diffusing is all that's necessary. And then some follow-up. Okay? But those are the stages of mitigating a critical incident stress. Training is key. Knowledge is power. Knowing what to expect can go a long way toward mitigating the effects of critical incident stress. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first one is the power of the battle dump. Anybody know what the battle dump is? Any law enforcement vets in here or TAC team members or anything? Well, a lot of things happen in your brain and other parts of your body in a high stress event. One of them is that your bowels tend to release. So, tactical officers in the military and law enforcement are taught that. And so, a common practice for SWAT team members or whatnot, if they're going on a big deal, a big high-risk warrant, something, before they go, they'll go take what they call colloquially a battle dump. They'll go to the restroom, try their best to clear their bowels, knowing that when they get out there in the heat of battle, they're going to release anyway, and they would rather release them in the bathroom than they would on the battlefield or in the line. So I want you to imagine a scenario. That's an important piece of information. So I want you to imagine our SWAT team is going out on a high-risk situation. It's going to be high stress. And you've got a junior SWAT team member who, for whatever reason, missed that day of training. And he doesn't know that his bowels may release in the heat of battle. So he didn't go to the bathroom beforehand. Over here you've got a veteran SWAT officer who knew very well that his bowels might release, but he forgot to go to the bathroom. Okay? So these 2 guys in their respective units get out there in the heat of battle, and sure enough, their bowels release. The veteran officer over here, his reaction, as you might imagine, might be, crap. Literally. Like, man, sorry fellas, I forgot. Right? No big deal. Imagine the reaction of this rookie officer over here who didn't know that it's normal for your bowels to release. And his bowels release in the middle of this operation. He doesn't say a word. He hopes nobody smells. And the immediate question, what do you think the immediate question he asks himself? Or should I say asks of himself? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? The answer is nothing. You're perfectly normal. But he doesn't know that because he missed that day of training. And so now you got a guy who's probably going to give up his position on the SWAT team. He's not going to tell anybody because we're John Wayne. We can't say, hey, I have an embarrassing, by the way, I pooped. I mean, in the after, anybody got anything to add? Yeah, I pooped, Now, hopefully what happens is that young officer is in the room in the after action thing with this veteran officer who says, yeah, by the way, I pooped, my bad. And maybe he'll get it that there's nothing wrong with him. So let me bring that away from law enforcement into real life. The doctor had me sleep in my lounge chair for a week after I got home. I didn't stay overnight. They sent me home that night. And he said, sleep in your lounge chair for about 7 days. I want you to keep your head elevated. I said, okay, I'm good with that. So I spent a lot of time in my lounge chair over those 7 days. And at some point around day 2 or 3 or something, I'm sitting there minding my own business, watching TV or something, was not thinking about the attack. And I did think about it a lot. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about that attack. And suddenly, out of nowhere, inexplicably, I was overcome with irrational terror. I'm talking about terror. I was suddenly terrified for no reason. I need to stress, for no reason. I wasn't terrified by the dog in my mind at that point. It was just nothing. And it lasted a little brief period of time. I don't know how long it lasted. And then when it kind of went away, my reaction was, there it is. And I said, hey, Patty, guess what just happened? Or I walked around and eventually told her. I was just sitting there and it just came all over me, Because I knew, because you're going to know in just a minute some of the things that may happen to you. I knew that there was anything, and so I did not say to myself, what's wrong with me? And that's the purpose of my training today, is to prepare you for when you come through a critical incident. I want you to know you're normal. There's nothing wrong with you. When you have crying fits, or you suddenly can't cry anymore, or when all you want to do is sleep, or you suddenly can't sleep anymore, you're normal. That's what I want to drill that home. Because I knew that knowledge is power, it never once crossed my mind that something was wrong with me and I was weak or unable to process. I just said, that came out of my mouth. Once it was over, not during it, I was tight as a drum during it, thinking, what is happening, But knowledge is power. Oh, I was supposed to be clicking so you see the SWAT guys. There's no pictures of dumps, so. All right, you remember we talked about this? Everybody reacts differently. One of the key pieces of information I want you to take away, because I want you to never judge another person's reaction by how you think you might react. Law enforcement officers are bad about shooting our wounded, we say, and so that young rookie cop that crapped his pants and didn't know that might happen. If somebody, one of the fears he has is that the other guys are going to ridicule him mercilessly. And you know what? Sadly, they would, probably. So don't be that guy. Don't do that. Everybody reacts differently. Never judge another's reaction by how you think you might react. If you see a big 7-foot-tall dude, 300-pound man, hair all over him, tattoos everywhere, just weeping like a baby because something awful just happened to him, don't think to yourself, what a weenie, because you think you might not be. Don't do that. Everybody reacts differently, and you can't help it. You can't help it. Things happen in your brain. They're directed by your brain. All right. If you're the kind of person that writes things down, write this down. Write down, everybody reacts differently, and write this down too. I'm going to show you how to get all this information later, but I want you to write it down because I know that when you write things, you remember them. Your hands are tied to your brain, and when you write something down, it helps you to remember. I want you to take this away from here. Any reaction, including no reaction, is a normal reaction. When you're coming through, or somebody you love comes through a traumatic event, any reaction, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, including no reaction at all. Like Corey, my 19-year-old son, he had no reaction. Well, he was just as normal as I was, sitting in my lounge chair shivering because I was terrified for no reason. Any reaction, including no reaction, is a normal reaction. And the second one is similar. You are a normal person having a normal reaction to an abnormal event. It's the event that's abnormal, not you. It's the shooting in Las Vegas that's abnormal. We weren't built to see that kind of suffering. I'm talking about mainly the people who were there in person. That's what's abnormal. Not you puking your guts up over here. You know, there's nothing wrong. You're normal. That's what's not normal. Any reaction, including no reaction, is a normal reaction, and you are a normal person having a normal reaction to an abnormal event. Please, please, if you don't remember anything else I tell you today, remember those two things. And the third being, everybody reacts different. So don't judge how somebody else. All right, so this is the meat of it here. And again, I'm going to show you how to have access to this list in the form of a PDF. Here's some cognitive mental reactions. Again, about a third of the people report experiencing these, not experiencing any of this stuff. About a third report experiencing some, and about a third report experiencing them to a severe degree, or a large number of them. Blaming somebody else, confusion, nightmares. I didn't have nightmares as much as I did flashbacks during the day, but there were a couple of nights when I finally decided to go to bed, when it was at the end of my 7 days and I was ready to go sleep in my bed. I went to bed and I felt fearful. So I got up, went to the bathroom, and I turned the bathroom light on. And I came back into the bedroom, and it sort of illuminated the bedroom, and I was okay. You know what? It didn't bother me a bit. I didn't feel like I was weird. You know why? That's what I needed to happen, because of what I was in the middle of right then, and I knew because of my training it was perfectly normal. And eventually I was able to turn the lights back off. About 3 nights, Patty said. I didn't remember. See, I don't remember. That's another thing. I don't remember how long that happened. But she said after about 3 nights of that, I was able to turn the light out, and because I like it to be dark. I like this, I sleep better in the dark. And where's Caveman? Is he in here? Yeah. See, I could sleep in Mammoth Cave, boy. Cold, dark. Yeah. All right. So anyway, you see the list. I don't want to go through every one. Can y'all see them in the back? You're going to have access to this, so don't panic. You don't have to write these down. Poor concentration. I kind of highlighted some of the ones that touched on me, and I did have nightmares, just not a lot. Poor concentration, that was a big one for me. I couldn't focus. It was a big one for Patty, too. Yeah, by the way, Patty suffered as well, right? I mean, nearly lost her husband, had to drive me like Mario Andretti to meet the ambulance, talking on the phone on 911 saying, lady, ain't nobody got time for that, No, she didn't do that. She was great. She did say lady, trying to get her attention. And she drove great. But she drove me to meet the ambulance and all that. Yeah, she saw it all happen. She saw, not all of it, but she came out when Corey came out. So she got to see the finale. She got to see her 19-year-old son shooting at his dad. kind of, And so she had a difficult time concentrating. She had a sudden fear for driving in cities. Jackson, Mississippi, and things like that. Not like we almost had a wreck. I mean, it's irrational, but it's normal. It's perfectly normal. That it was a reaction that she had. Poor problem solving. Hypervigilance. I should have. Oh no, I'm going to talk about that on another screen. If I don't, somebody remind me. Intrusive images. I had intrusive images. Before I would go to bed, I would just suddenly see that massive teeth right here, like I did before. Even worse. I made it worse in my images. It was worse. And I would have those happen to me. And I'm going to tell you in a minute when they stopped. It was almost like magic. But I'm going to tell you in a minute about how they stopped. Just like that. Preoccupation with the event. Emotional reactions. Feeling of failure, second guessing yourself. Fear, I suffered from that. Anxiety, guilt, survivor guilt. Boy. So, if you got 2 people involved in an event, one dies, one doesn't, one survives, the other one doesn't, the survivor often suffers from survivor guilt. Why wasn't it me? Why do I get to live my life and he didn't? That's a real thing. Emotional shock, self-blame, apprehension, mark of Cain. Everybody looking at me. Why is everybody looking at me? That's a very real thing that you just, and I'm talking about irrationally. Even if you look completely normal, you don't have scars all over your face, but there's something in you making you think that everybody's looking at you all the time. Behavioral reactions, never relaxed. Change in speech patterns. Eating changes. And notice it says changes, eating changes. What does that mean? You start eating a lot? It might. It also might mean you quit eating. You follow me? The key thing is changes. From whatever you normally do, changes. Expect those for a period of time. Risk-taking, crying spells, inability to rest or sleep. I had trouble resting and sleeping, even though I was taking narcotics for a little while. Okay, the hypervigilance is this is what I was coming to, hyper alert to environment. I didn't want to be around people for a while. I can't explain it. No particular reason. I just didn't. And it didn't take all that long, but anyway, I can remember the first few times I went into Walmart. And who's not afraid at Walmart, right? Have you seen those people at Walmart thing? Anyway, the first time I went in Walmart, I had a hard time putting it into words, how I felt, trying to explain to Patty how I felt. And when I saw this handout, I knew what it was. That's what I was. I was hyper alert. I was scanning for threats unconsciously, and I felt like my eyes were this big. And I would talk to people and my eyes weren't this big, but I felt like they were. And I felt like my head was on a swivel. And it's like, and I finally dawned on me, that's what I was doing. I was being hyper alert to my environment. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again, and eventually I'm still scared of Walmart, but so change in sexual interest of functioning. And the key is change. It could be either direction or just changes. Social changes, withdrawal, isolation, antisocial acts, change in social activity, angry at everybody, arrogance. These are things that have been reported. Getting angry at God, questioning God's authority, questioning your own religious or spiritual status, increase or decrease in religious activity. Now I can tell you right now, and it's not because I'm holy or anything, but I didn't get mad at God. We were immediately thanking Him. Because as I said at the very beginning, I survived both during and after due to the grace and mercy of the Lord Jesus Christ. Period. All that I'm talking to you, the fact that I had all this training is part of that mercy. But, man, I just can't, I'm being in heaven a long time and I won't have enough time to thank Him for what He's done for me and my family. Speaking of family changes, irritability, might get a little snappy. Did I get snappy? I didn't get snappy. You didn't get snappy. So it didn't apply to us, but it could. Approximately 1/3 of people did experience that. Agitated, easily angered, over or under reaction to discipline needs, withdrawal, isolation, questioning career choice, especially if it was something that happened on your job. Others' reactions to you. People may second guess you have to learn to be patient with folks. A lot of times people won't know how to talk to you, but when they do talk to you, they may be judgmental. I got hammered on social media. I went 2 days afterwards and wrote a big post on Facebook. Said everything that happened, talked about my mistakes, and I had one dude got on there and say, "You beat your wife." I can tell by how you write. You abuse your wife and you abuse that dog and you abuse your wife and your children. And kids, yeah. And you know what was amazing? Some other people that follow us on Facebook, I didn't have to defend myself. Another guy jumped on there and said, "Man, you don't know anything about this man," And I should have said at the beginning, I didn't want to talk a lot about the dog or the attack, but you got to know I love that dog. We don't abuse our animals. He didn't react to me because we were harsh with him. The experts, our vet and some other experts said he was wired wrong. Every now and then you come across a dog that's just wired wrong. I think I precipitated the attack that day, but the fact that he was wired wrong is why he was relentlessly trying to kill me. Instead of giving me the message and backing off, he was not going to stop until I was dead, or he was. But, be aware, be thinking about this ahead of time, that you're going to have people second guessing your actions. Well, here's what you should have done. Why didn't you do this? Things of that nature. Wrong expectations from television background. Yeah, because just like in law enforcement, who's old enough to remember Barnaby Jones on TV? Used to call him One-Shot Barnaby Jones because he'd pull out that .38 snub-nosed revolver about that big, and they'd be a dude 150 yards away running down this thing, and old Barnaby would look at him and pow, and that guy would roll. That don't happen, boys and girls. In real life, you ain't hitting some dude with one shot from 150 yards away with a .38 snub-nose. But if you don't know that, you could have, depending on what your trauma is, you could have wrong expectations from TV that you watch about what needs to happen to you, or you see, if you're always looking at John Wayne and how he comes out, I don't nothing bother him, Pilgrim, and you think you are John Wayne, you may end up being sorely disappointed when you find yourself crying. Well, John Wayne don't cry, I bet he did. I bet he did when he fell off a horse or whatever. So, after a critical incident, what now? And I need to move along. Regular exercise. These are helpful. Regular, honest communication. Does that look familiar? Similar stuff to helping you deal with cumulative stress, but they're all the more important after a critical incident. Healthy eating. Listen, I knew from my training that one of the first things we did as a family, as soon as we had a chance, we sat down and we talked it through. And it helped us because we were each able to fill in blanks for the other from their perspective. Corey was able to correct a couple of things for me. I was able to correct a couple of things for them that they had perceived about, So it was very vital information, and it allowed us a chance to talk. It's very healthy. Huh? Yeah, and I didn't even know that, but they had already started diffusing each other, if you will, in the hospital. Waiting on me to come out, they were already sitting there talking to each other, putting things together and putting the pieces together and helping each other understand. Thanks, Patty. Healthy eating, plenty of water, healthy amount of sleep and rest. Same stuff, but all right, so here's some specific helpful ideas. Strenuous exercise within 48 hours if you're able to. I couldn't. I was unable to do strenuous exercise because of doctor's orders. Huh? We did go walk around outside. We did do some exercise as best we could. Don't use drugs and alcohol. If you drink alcohol, stay away from it for a period of time. Reach out. Maintain a normal schedule as possible. Give yourself permission to feel. Look at this. Make no big life changes for 6 months. If you were thinking about changing jobs or whatever, wait for about 6 months. If you can, as the situation allows. Don't make any major life decisions for about 6 months to allow your brain to come back to the normal whatever it was before, okay? And look at that one at the bottom. This is very important. That's why I've got it in all capital letters. Don't keep secrets. It's amazing the effect that keeping secrets can happen. What will happen to you? So, Tim Rutledge, who's the director of the Mississippi Law Enforcement Alliance for Peer Support, he heard about what happened to me. He knew about my background in Louisiana from a mutual friend, Aubrey Futrell, who was Terry Bradshaw's pulling guard at Louisiana Tech, by the way. But he's a law enforcement trainer and a dear friend of mine. And Tim wanted to meet me and have lunch. And so on my way up there that day, and this was, Patty, did we ever figure out? January sometime. So it was weeks after. It was a month after the event or something like that. And so, month and a half maybe. And so when I'm driving up there, I had a flashback. And I'm driving and I see Duke's face. Whoa! And it just kind of. And when I had him, it didn't last, and it didn't cause me to curl up in a ball, and it didn't cause me the terror that I felt on day 3 that I described earlier, it just was disconcerting, and I shook it off. So in the normal conversation, our lunch conversation, I had mentioned that to him, and he got a puzzled look on his face, and he said, you shouldn't be having flashbacks still. I said, really? He said, no. He said, let me tell you a story. And he told me about an officer in another state that he had worked with following an officer-involved shooting. It was a big shootout, and apparently this officer was a tactical team member. And he had one of those you've seen those big plexiglass shields, or not plexiglass, but they're black, but there's like a plexiglass window in the middle of them so the officers can see how to advance, right? And during the course of this event, that officer was advancing, and rounds from the bad guy are hitting that window right in front of his face. Bam! And he's still having to advance or whatever. And so he needed, he needed some help processing all that afterwards. Well, sometime after Tim had worked with the guy, Tim said, I get a call from this guy, and he says, Tim, man, I need to talk to you. I'm in a ditch. Well, Tim thought he was using a rhetorical device. He thought he meant, not literally, but he said, what do you mean you're in a ditch? He said, I mean I'm in a ditch. I ran in a ditch. He said, well, why'd you run in a ditch? He said, because I'm driving down a road, and I saw a 300-pound bullet coming for the windshield of my car, and I swerved to miss it and ran into the ditch. Now, obviously, the bullet didn't exist, right? We all know that. But it was real enough to him that he took evasive action and ran in the ditch. So Tim said he had seen and read about some research that we've already talked about the importance of communicating after a critical incident event. Well, it's even more than I've hinted, because he said research has shown that flashbacks are often tied to a memory that hasn't been released, a secret, if you will. So he asked that officer, what secret are you holding on to? What haven't you told anybody? And the guy was initially, nothing. I haven't withheld any information. I've told everybody everything. And he said, come on, man, think about it. Dig down deep. And that went back and forth, he said, for a minute or two. Him saying, no, really. And Tim's like, think. And he thought, and he finally said, well, I'll be. He said, there is something. And he never told me what the guy told him, and I don't know if the guy ever did tell him. And Tim then looked at me and he said, what secret are you holding on to? And I was exactly like that guy. I said, no. I said, there's nothing. There's no part of this I haven't revealed. And he said, dig down, think about it. Same thing. I mean, it was a mirror. 2 or 3 times I'm like, no, I can't think. And then I said these words. I said, I've told Patty everything. And when I said that, it dawned on me. But I hadn't told Corey. See, remember I told you Corey shot through my breeches leg and we didn't find it out till like the next day. We didn't figure it out. I was relaying that information to a good friend of mine in law enforcement in another state than mine. It's not even this state. It's the great state of Alabama. And by the way, Auburn's kicking our butt right about now. But anyway, and he gave me some advice that at the time sounded good to me. And his advice at the time was, I had told him, we hadn't told Corey, and he said, I wouldn't tell him if I were you. Because, and this sounds like good wisdom, he said, the next time if it ever happens again, if he knew that, it may make him hesitant to pull the trigger again. I said, that sounds right to me. So we made the decision not to tell Corey. And so I told Tim that, and he said, you need to tell Corey. He said, number one, your flashbacks will stop, I'm willing to bet. And number two, he's going to find out anyway. And if you don't tell him and he finds out, then he's going to ask, what else has my father withheld from me? And so I made the decision sitting at that lunch table at that restaurant in Jackson, Mississippi. You're right. I said, I made the decision to tell Corey. From the time sitting at that dinner table in Jackson, Mississippi, when I made the decision to tell Corey, I haven't had a flashback since. And now the punchline of that story is, it was a day or so later when we had... That was Friday I had that lunch, and it wasn't until Sunday until I could have Corey have an audience with Corey where I felt like I could bring it up and tell him. And as I start building up to tell him what happens, he's sitting on the couch and he starts grinning. And I said, what are you grinning about? do you know what I'm about to tell you? He said, I shot through your pants leg. I'm like, what? He knew the whole time. I said, how did you know that? And did we ever figure if it was mine or yours? Patty had left her phone, or I had left my phone, laying on the desk on a counter one day with a text message between she and I open. And Corey's not a snoop, but I mean, gosh, it's laying there open right by, and there's a text, and he walked by and read a text. Yeah. So he rides by and walks by and reads the text message and decides not to say anything about it. So Tim was right. Had I chosen not to tell him, then Corey would have that would have eaten on him. What else won't my dad tell me? But the point is, I didn't get released. And look, don't ask me why. It's not hocus pocus. It's something chemical. I can't explain why the flashbacks stopped, but I can tell you that they did. And they stopped before I ever told him. They stopped the instant that I made that decision at that table. So, don't keep secrets. Talk it out. Talk it out. All right, we're almost done. Also, think about whether you should watch news events, read papers, social media about the event. And when I put this together, it was months ago. And I didn't have any good examples, but Las Vegas keeps presenting itself as a good example. That'd be a good example. If a person was involved there, either injured or uninjured or what, family member lost what, but they were involved in the incident, I would talk to them and I'd say, look, I'm not telling you not to read the paper, but I'm telling you, consider that. Consider not watching the news for a while. Allow your brain to process what your eyes saw, what happened. Before you start, you know what I'm saying? So that's just a consideration. And maybe you should ask somebody who knows you well, your wife, baby, do you think it'd be in my benefit to stay away from social media for a while or whatever? Keep a notepad with you to log down events as the memory recurs, because they will. You'll remember things long after the event. Hey, I remember that. And you'll forget things too. I thought I lost my LSU ring. I thought I lost it in the fight. Months later, we found it in the barn. I had lost it that morning, totally unrelated. But because I had recognized it gone subsequent to the fight, my brain made the connection to the fight and assumed that I had lost it during the fight. Anyway, funny stuff. Tips for family members and significant others. Listen, so what this means is, if you're a family member of someone who has been involved, you aren't, but somebody you love has been involved in a critical incident. These are for you. Listen carefully. Spend time with them. Offer your listening ear, even if not asked. Help with everyday household tasks. Give them some private time. Some private time. Don't leave them isolated, but give them some private time. Don't take their anger personally. If they snap at you or they say, get away from me, don't take it personally. It's normal. Tell them you're sorry that this event had to occur and that you want to understand and help. The best way to help is to encourage communication, exercise, proper eating, and ample rest. Helpful coping tips. Return to your balance of life for support. Talk to your spouse, your pastor, your close friends. Remember, you have a permission to feel. You don't have to keep those floating balls pushed underwater. The longer you try to hold them under, the bigger the splash they're going to make when they finally come up. Exercise. It helps chemically. It's not just a good idea. Just like shooting baseball, most everything else, there are the basics you must return to. Use the incident to grow, to get better as a person, and help others who are in need. That's been one of the best medicines for me, is the contact I've had with people all over the world responding to my post about what happened, talking further about it, allowing me to talk more about it, asking legitimate questions. And that's been a great ministry opportunity for me, but also it's been great for my healing, What can you expect long term? You can expect for a while a preoccupation of the event. I still, there are times I find myself just thinking about it. It doesn't bother me like it did, but occasionally I'm preoccupied with it. That's okay. Get ready for everybody's opinion. Lawsuits, depending on what your event, and that doesn't apply to my event, but depending on if it's a bad wreck or something, you may have to deal with litigation down the road. Mark of Cain again. Everybody's looking at me. Stupid statements, mostly intended as jokes. Most people don't mean harm, but some of them were raised in a barn. You'd think. Main things to remember. If you hadn't written them down already, write them down now. Everybody reacts differently. Don't judge folks based on how you think they should react. Any reaction, including no reaction, is a normal reaction. And then finally, if you've been involved in a traumatic event, you are a normal person having a normal reaction to an abnormal event. For more information, sign up for our When Trauma Strikes email list at traumastrikes.org. And for some crazy reason, you can't put www. Just put traumastrikes.org because it won't work. It drives me nuts. But just put traumastrikes.org, or you can go to aldermanfarms.net/traumastrikes. And if you're worried about spam, how long have I had that email list? Almost a year. It'll be almost a year. I ain't sent an email yet. But I'm going to. I'm going to start collecting some stuff, and it's going to be helpful to you in terms of critical incident stress. That's all I got. Are there any questions? God, I went 15 minutes over. Yes, sir. I had it strong before, and it didn't get anything but get stronger afterwards. In case you missed it at the beginning, I survived because of the grace and mercy of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I just spent a while describing some of those mercies, that the knowledge, the particular knowledge and training that I happened to have in my law enforcement career were critical to my survival. But I just can't explain to you the things that, and again, it would take 2 hours, the 100 things that had to line up just right on the day of that event for me to live, and they all did. And I'm talking about crazy things, and they all lined up, and it was Him. He had a purpose in it. I can tell you this, I will not volunteer to do it again. But I'm no longer sorry that it happened. And I reached that point, I think it was 2 months. I think it was 2 months after the event itself. I looked at my wife and said, I'm no longer sorry that it happened, because I already saw the opportunities that He was giving me to, number one, give glory to Him, and number two, to help people. And I had 70-something. If you're on Facebook, you know what a message request is. They used to call it your other folder. It's when you get people who don't know you, who aren't a friend of yours on Facebook, can send you a message, and it goes into what they call message requests. That's what they currently call it. The last time I counted, I had about 76 of those. And of those 76, somewhere between 56 and 60 of them were people thanking me for either saving their lives or the lives of somebody they love who had seen some of the signs in their dog that I described in my thing. And so I'm like, thank you, Lord. No, let's not go do it again right quick, but I don't want to do it again, but I think it sounds a little strange for me to say I'm glad it happened. I can't say that. I think that would be a little pretentious. But I can honestly say that I'm no longer sorry that it happened. I'm not sorry that it happened because so many good things came of it. Thank you for that question. You allowed me to preach a minute. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think there's probably firing up a bonfire out there, and I thank you so much for coming. And I hope you'll sign up and get that information. You're very kind. Looks like you made it. Congratulations. That's a lot of stuff. If there's anything presented in the presentation about which you have questions, or if you'd like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Tommy at traumastrikes.org. I'm happy to dialogue with you. I'm happy to talk more about what happened to me. I like talking about it. It's helpful to talk about it. I'm happy to expound on how we deployed some of the principles that were presented here in this video to help us navigate the aftermath of trauma. The key is to be prepared, and that was my goal with this video, with the presentation as well as this video, is to help prepare you, because as you saw in the presentation, that's the first step, training and preparation, to help you know, because knowledge is power. And so I hope I've given you some power over your future. I hope I've given you some power over the trauma that you may be facing now, may have just recently faced, or may be going to face in the future and you don't even know it yet. You can survive. These principles are not hocus pocus. They're based on science and research. Things happen in your brain that you can't control. But you can know that you are normal, having a normal reaction. That any reaction, including no reaction, is a normal reaction. And everybody responds differently. So try not to judge anybody based on how you think you would react. Anyway, thanks for sticking in here with me for this long. And again, as I asked at the beginning of the video, please share this video. It's not monetized. I'm not trying to make money on ads. I don't want any money. I want the message to get out. I want to hear testimonies of how these principles have helped you or someone that you love. I want to hear from you. So again, email me please, Tommy@traumastrikes.org. Thank you.